The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone and Happy New Year to all. This is Tanuja Kopal, Contributing Editor for Lab Manager, and I thank you for taking the time to join us today for our very first product showcase webinar in 2012. So today we will be joined by 3 experts who will share with us the latest in the capabilities and uses of electronic lab notebooks, or ELNs in short. But before I turn it over to our speakers, just a few reminders for all of you. Today's webinar will be archived on Lab Manager's website, which is www.labmanager.com. So if you or any of your colleagues need to review today's webinar, you will be able to do so starting sometime next week. The website will also host other resources and articles related to ELNs that you may find useful. We are hosting this webinar to provide you with an opportunity to communicate with our experts in real time. So please send along your questions or concerns about ELNs and feel free to share your experiences with us. You can do so by typing in your questions or comments in the question box that appears on the right-hand side of your screen. We will begin addressing your questions after all our speakers have given their short presentations. And finally, if you would like to have a copy of the slides presented today, I would encourage you to contact the speakers directly. We will share their email addresses with you in our closing slide. So with that, let me introduce our first speaker, who is Francois Beillouin, who is a product manager for the Open Lab ELN at Agilent Technologies. He has over 10 years of experience in ELN solutions deployment for large pharma and biotech companies, and has a very good understanding of the solutions needed by customers in the life science industry. So I'm sure we'll have a lot to gain from his knowledge and expertise as he shares his perspectives on ELNs with us today. Welcome, Francois.
Thank you, Tanuja, for the introduction, and thank you to all attendees for joining this webinar. I'm delighted to start, and I will start my presentation today on considering that we are now, in 2011, approximately 10 years of intense deployment of ELNs around the world, and I think it's a good time to look back a little bit about what happened and to see where we are and where we come from. So that's why the title of the evolution is a fast evolution, because a lot has happened, and also when that goes so fast, it's not always easy to keep everybody happy. So that's the agenda. We will see step by step what happened and where we are with state-of-the-art ELN today. And at the end, I will try to give you some hints and guidelines on how to select an ELN today, which is not necessarily very easy in the context of the intense competition we face. So let's start with the first part of the presentation. How fast did the ELN market evolve, and how the products have evolved from the paper to electronic versions. First of all, let's look at what you ask of your ELN today. Typically, you have ELN today in your labs, and you find absolutely natural to ask into the system, typically as a scientist, some questions like, where is my data? Who has done similar things before? What was the best parameter used to produce this result? And you can now find these kind of answers into your ELN. Lab managers also have a different view of their ELN system and are typically able to answer questions like, what's currently running in my lab? How will I do my planning for the next days, weeks, or even months? How can I dispatch and control what's being done in my lab? All these questions can be answered thanks to the diversity of information and data you can now capture and organize into electronic lab notebooks. This is without forgetting the company officers, the people who are in charge, for example, of security or IP protection. They also find these tools very helpful. So how did we get there? So that's the first what I call the minimal move. When we started moving from paper to what we call paper on glass, when we repeat what we do on paper, but on electronic systems. So this is typically systems that provide capabilities to record notes, protocols, results, to attach digital pictures, chromatograms directly into your experiment reports. You can also enrich your experiment descriptions with scientific objects like molecular reactions, sequences. And of course, all this data is searchable so that it makes it easy to find what has been done in your labs. At this stage, lawyers are still hesitant, so most of the companies started with an hybrid mode and not going for full electronic. But that was already a great move forward, a great step forward for users. They were able to save a lot of time, to avoid duplicating experiments, so save a lot of time, improve quality. So that was a very interesting first move, but that very quickly made it to the next step, which is the paperless lab. So what does it need to go to the paperless step? Typically, you can take the first step and enrich the content, typically annotating directly into an ELN, being able to, for example, to view your annotated picture, remove the annotation to see what's behind. So that kind of advanced manipulation is now possible. You can also add elements like videos or links to external systems, something you could not do on paper. So this is also what the Electronic Lab Notebook allows you to do today. In addition to the experiment content itself, it is now possible to connect all kinds of instruments, from balances, titrators, so all the small instruments can now be linked to an ELN, so you can capture directly the results and the values into your forms, but also larger instruments, LCs, GCs, NMR, so all these instruments can also be connected and data results integrated into your experiments. You are developing libraries of protocol or results templates, and at this stage we've also started to see a lot of adoption, a wide adoption of electronic records and signature, and this is really what we see today, a wide acceptance and wide deployment of electronic systems with the security that brings digital signatures with individual certificates, for example, and also trusted timestamping. So this adds another layer of benefits to what we had before. Less error in transcriptions, so you don't copy the data anymore. You can have a direct review of the data. It's much more easier to find the data and review it in the system. You harmonize on the different work practices you have in several labs, in departments, even across sites and geographies sometimes, and a great IP protection. So that's the second step. However, this does not stop here. ELN users want more, and ELN organizations that want to deploy ELN also try to implement similar, if possible, an ELN for multiple activities. That's why we ask a lot of flexibility to these systems. So that we have now a lot of forms and templating capabilities into Electronic Lab Notebooks, which are used to adapt the system to the specific needs of different businesses, like biology, analytical chemistry, and this is more and more capabilities that we offer to customers, and in the same direction by providing a lot of flexibility. Requirements of customers is also that they should not rely on the vendor to deploy and develop these configurations. So it's also a movement into the independence of the customer, so that they can choose who will develop these configurations, whether these are individual users into their IT organization or the local company they are used to work with. So this is typically what we see in enterprise class ELN or multidiscipline ELNs. So the other aspect which is very important in today's ELN is the collaboration. Collaboration not only within the lab, but between labs. And today, the concept of individual notebooks is over. I mean, it started like this with chemistry ELN 10 years ago. Typically, here now, you have groups of users that collaborate to the same experiments with the appropriate tracking of who is doing what, and this is all managed by electronic systems. Also, the modules like work requests are often integrated, which allow you to distribute tasks within labs and also know instantly who is doing what and where are the results. So a typical use of these processes is to support the collaboration between a CRO, contract research organization, and its customers. So, having been through all this evolution in approximately 10 years has been a real challenge. And sometimes it's become difficult for users or organizations to know where they are, to select a provider. And let's see why. Because today the situation often looks like this. So a lot of emphasis is put on the features. So most of ELN products today provide many features, or I would say too many features, and at some point it becomes very difficult for end users to learn the product. So the learning curve is difficult. It takes too long to master a product, and in the end the user experience is degraded. And on the same vein, the architecture that was working at the beginning is more and more difficult to apprehend and does not necessarily scale with the performance which is expected for such systems. So this is what it should look like. Really a good balance between these three elements. So the features, of course, it's important, but it's not because the system is really flexible that you should try to push too much into it and just keep it for what it is designed for. Think about the user and try to simplify what they see. Even if the configuration is maybe a bit more complex for the administration, it should be really easy for end users. When you deploy systems, over hundreds or thousands of users, they are the key people here. And to support such deployments or collaboration between small but distant teams, the web architecture is really important, and that's how you can reach your objectives by very simply accessing a system wherever it is. So a few hints. How can you choose between the existing ELN offering? I mean, I'm sure you know the resources in the web. You maybe have 30 or 40, even more providers today. A few hints. When you select a solution, it's for long term. You are clearly selecting a tool that would be used for decades into your organizations, at least if you like it, and if it works for your scientists. So look at the long-term viability of the supplier. That's really an important criteria for the selection. Look carefully at the three areas we described: architecture, features, and user experience. All of the three areas have to be good or even better than good. So think about, in decades, how your company will look like, where you want to project your company to. So think about a global company that will support a global deployment and global growth of your company. So that's also another key aspect to look at. Today you start maybe in the United States, in Europe, but you certainly have facilities in Asia, and that will continue to expand. So a true multidiscipline here, ELN will really facilitate the deployment. So that's the tendency we see here. companies want to simplify the overall IT environment, and so that's a key driver, and to support different groups that see all the benefits they will have by moving to an electronic system. So these are a few hints. Maybe the most important one is, of course, try the system first. When you decide to move to such a system with the investment that it takes, look, try it, and make your own idea based on your specific needs. So just a few words about Agilent. So Agilent Technologies, we develop instruments, but also the Open Lab portfolio, which consists of the CDS, an enterprise content management, and an electronic lab notebook component. So our ELN is from the start a web-based system that started 10 to 12 years ago. It has been deployed on many groups from small to large deployments, and really focuses on the end user, simplifying the interface. So I really encourage you to have a look at it, and for that there are several options. First of all, I mean, this presentation is available online, so if you want to spend more time on the presentation and read a bit more what are the different steps in this evolution, you can find it on the first link. And I encourage you to try the system itself. So it's now available in a cloud instance. So with the URL here, you will have more information on the ELN system, and you can try it. So if you have additional questions, you can always contact me on my email. So I hope it was useful, and I will turn it back to you, Tanuja.
Thank you, Francois. For those of you who may have missed my opening remarks, this webinar will be archived on Lab Manager's website for at least 6 months. And if you would like a copy of today's presentations, please email the speakers directly, and we will be sharing their email addresses with you in our closing slide. So our second speaker today is Dr. Dominic John, who is a Product Marketing Director at Accelrys. He too has over 12 years experience working at MDL, Cimex, and Accelrys, researching, managing, and marketing scientific software, which included ELNs, data analysis, and decision support systems, which were all designed to meet the R&D informatics needs. So thank you for joining us today, Dominic, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Okay, thank you, and welcome everyone. And also thank you to Francois for a very nice introduction. I think this nicely complements what I'll be talking about today, which is the next generation ELNs. Where are the ELNs heading? And Francois really picked up an important point about finding the right balance. And when I actually look at the next generation ELN concept, I actually see it as multiple generations from different species as such. What I mean by that is, as Francois is implying, certain types of users and environments need different types of ELNs. And if you look at really early research, people wanting to replace paper, they want to keep it simple approach, a very easy to deploy system that gets the primary benefits of going electronic. But what we see is that communities of users that are deploying this, more environments where the biggest business drivers are process efficiency and compliance. And here, not just about replacing paper, but how do I integrate the systems? How do I bring together a community of users to drive process efficiency and ensure compliance? And there's a whole other area where it really makes sense that you have a very highly regulated lockdown QA/QC environment where it makes sense to have a very specific ELN species as such to deliver the right balance for scientists or labs that are really doing QA/QC. So I'll be talking as we go through today, really where are these three areas evolving, specifically focusing in on the integrated ELN lab, and then on the keep it simple ELN approach. So let's look at the ELNs that are evolving in the space of really trying to drive process efficiency and integration. And to really understand where that evolution is coming from and where the vendors are going, it's really about where did the market start off. And that, if you look at most of the deployments today in the scientific world, it's very much in early development, where the big focus is on innovation It's about how can I document more efficiently? How can I capture and reuse that electronic information more efficiently? How can I protect that innovation? But now we're seeing mainstream adoption further downstream where people are doing product development, product optimization, and then into manufacturing. And here really it's about that process efficiency. It's about quality. How can I build that efficiency into the day-to-day work that a scientist does within their electronic notebook? So what does this mean for those integrated ELNs? Where are the primary investments that they're taking this next generation? And I see four very main focuses here. And I'll go into a little bit more context as to what this means. But really it's about going beyond that paper on glass, not only just replacing the paper document workflow, but delivering productivity tools that not only delivers productivity for individual scientists, but whole teams of scientists, or whole project groups, or whole departments. So the four areas that I see very heavy investment to develop the next generation ELN in this area. First of all, it's around integrations, connecting the scientists, the instruments, the information, and the software to drive efficiency. We see workflow orchestration tools. When you go to a paper world, from a paper to a paper on glass, how do I transition and orchestrate work in an electronic world? You need tools to help you versus just ad hoc email, etc. And then looking at the ELN, this is where you're manipulating your data. This is where you can manipulate your data. Previously, you'd step out to Excel, SAS, Jump, multiple different applications. How can you streamline the analysis, the processing of data inside your ELN? Make it more efficient, make it more consistent. And again, there's a heavier investment here to drive productivity. And the final area, and probably the biggest area of change, is really around data management and data access. The ELN is capturing your IP, it's capturing your knowledge, it's capturing your sample information. There's a whole new role of how that information can be used and leveraged to drive personal efficiency as well as team-based, project-based efficiency. So let's give some examples here. Integration, driving process efficiency. An analytical chemist here, for instance, they'll enter information into their ELN. They have multiple systems that they might enter that information. This could be the calibration of a set of apparatus they're using. But instead of entering it twice and having transcription errors, through integration in the ELN, when you enter it once, it instantly updates the other system without having to transcribe, transfer, or ask other people. In addition, thinking about the ELN as a scientist now, what are the series of samples that I'm going to be testing here? What is the methodology I'm using? You write that up in your electronic environment, and then making it very seamless and very fast, you just send the sample sequence to go off to, for instance, a Waters Empower system to execute your analysis. Those systems do it very efficiently, and the point here really is about capturing the results back with your original notebook entry. It's not about capturing necessarily all the data, but capturing the really pertinent high-value data. But again, this can be done with a couple of clicks, really driving efficiency. Instead of copying and pasting, instead of manually transferring information, transcribing information, very efficient. And likewise, you can start integrating and pulling information from these different systems. It could be a data management system here, such as the Waters New Genesis. But really key here is we're driving efficiency, fewer clicks, faster processing of information, moving information in your electronic environment. Next area of this heavy investment is really around workflow orchestration. If you think about that paper process, how do I ask someone in my lab to do the next step of an experiment? How do I share work? How do I efficiently work as a team and avoid bottlenecks? And really the electronic world now needs a set of tools to help orchestrate studies, orchestrate projects, orchestrate samples. So just as an example here, there's tools now being implemented and combined with the ELN to help you manage your information and share tasks with other individuals. Typical example here, I'm a process chemist, the synthesis chemist. I synthesize a set of samples that need testing, analyzing. I'll then define what types of analysis I want done from within my ELN. It's all within the context of me writing up my experiment. And then I'll actually assign it to a group of analytical scientist. It might be my service lab that I use in my environment. It might be my colleague in the same lab who's an expert in this area. And that colleague will then pick up the same notebook, be able to review the sample information, and be able to process that information directly inside his ELN for the analytical results. And then, very importantly, the information's traced and related back to the original requester. So really, you have a highly efficient way of transferring tasks, managing tasks, and transferring information with those tasks. Something that in the paper world was a huge challenge and subject to a lot of just inefficiencies. The third area is productivity tools inside the actual ELN. You have a lot of regular experimentation and analysis that you might do, and often it's just standard stuff that you just have to repeat manually. You might go to an Excel sheet and just keep doing the crunching. But how can you drive efficiency? If you've got a standard process, a standard set of analysis, how can you inside the ELN, drive it consistently and make it really efficient? So here's just a classic example here in the screening. You want to do a dose response and titration studies. You want to plate those out. You want to bring in some reader files. You want to do some dose response curves. That whole set of manual movement of information, that processing, the analysis, the importing, it can take you many hours to do that. But it's a fairly consistent workflow that you might be doing regularly. In an ELN now, they're adding capabilities where you simply, this can be done in literally about 20 seconds if you just lined everything up together. Realistically, it doesn't happen in 20 seconds, but the actual process can happen in 20 seconds. So in the experiment here, I can instantly do a array for my plate for the titration. I just press a single button, take these 6 samples, lay it on my plate. That generates a file for the aliquoting instrument. That the reader files are imported with just a couple of clicks. And then the whole reporting and analysis of the titration and dose response is done instantly. We're driving efficiency, we're driving consistency as these tools are being implemented inside the workflow of the ELN. The final area of heavy investment in these ELNs that are driving for integration and process efficiency really is around knowledge capture. Now let's step back and think about the role of the ELN. The ELN is where you capture the context of an experiment. And what we're seeing now is those contexts are typically unstructured. Who did what, how, why, and when. But there's more and more investment to capture the structured information, the instrument files, the specifics, and store that in a way that becomes usable. And really the aspect here is if I capture data from my experimentation, by adding information to it in the context of my notebook, it becomes information. The value of it increases. And then put that into a collaborative environment of users, combining their knowledge, their input. You're turning data information into knowledge, actionable knowledge, insight to drive experiments and drive conclusions from your results. And this is a big area of investment. It's where the underlying tools and the architecture are changing to help really create a new role for the ELN in these particular labs. So to give you an example, in conjunction to supporting that, there are a whole set of tools now designed to access that information. First of all, the information is being stored in a way that makes it easily to retrieve, but then there's a whole set of tools designed to give you dashboards, give you cross-analysis, experimentation, etc. here. And the ELN vendors are delivering not just the ELN, but tools now to access, mine, report that information. So just here's an example here of just several sets of types of reports and reuse of information that came out of an ELN. An actionable dashboard at the bottom here just shows sample statuses, the bottlenecks and the flows within a lab. Fantastic for lab managers working out where there's sample bottlenecks in their processes. To the right here, cross-sample insights. How do I look across everyone's experiments and see, for instance, before I do this reaction, which parameters give me the highest yield? Cross-experiment analysis. Previously, notebooks are very document-centric. This is now removing and dissolving the idea that I'm looking at a document at a time. I'm now looking at information and being able to explore and mine this information. Another key challenge, especially when you start looking at formulations, or biologics is traceability. Where did this sample come from? And being able to instantly track that back because electronic tools can trace that genealogy. Something that could have taken days and days to look through paper notebooks can now be achieved in seconds with a single report. Show me the genealogy, downstream, upseed of this batch, this sample, etc. So really a huge change in the role of the ELN as we move forward. And that's really for the integrated ELN concept. Those wishing to not just go paperless, but really go into that process efficiency, that compliance world. There's a whole aspect, though, that there's another area, and Francois really alluded to this. There's a lot of adoption of ELNs already. What's stopping the rest of the scientists really adopting? And one of those main areas is really about their infrastructure, their cost, their needs. And are these integrated ELNs too expensive, too complicated? And there's really a strategic dilemma. And Mike Elliott from Atrium Research has done the analysis that really shows that you can almost double the license cost for these integrated ELNs. You get a lot of value out for doing this integration, but can you afford it? Can you maintain it? Can you support it? And in a lot of cases, people really, some can really justify it, some have the infrastructure, but in a lot of cases, people really just want that, keep it simple. Let me benefit from document efficiency, IP protection, reuse of information, and collaboration. And that's really driving a focus on these keep it simple ELNs. And this next generation in this area is really focused on reaching a new area of scientists that want low-cost solutions that are easy to adopt, that support both internal and external collaboration, support project groups over in India, China, support multiple departments spread out in multiple locations in the US or Europe. And we actually see two flavors here. We see initiatives for those in-house installations, and we see a movement to the cloud, moving your electronic lab notebook into a centralized environment out in the cloud where anyone can access, whole project teams can access here. And looking at some of the things those keep it simple generation of ELNs are doing, for instance, there's web applications, easy to deploy. No installation. There's technology out there that means you don't even have to do an install. Ease of use. People don't want to be trained anymore. They want to pick it up like Amazon and just run with it. Pick it up like Google. Low admin. They can't afford the admin. They don't have the resources. So we're seeing this aspect. And then there's the cloud, where I don't have the hardware. I don't have the IT to do the backup, the protection of my IP. And out in the cloud now, just add a scientist, add a subscription, add an internet connection, and you can actually be going with an ELN. In fact, there's ELNs you can get running in 60 seconds. Literally sign up, and in 60 seconds you can be accessing an electronic lab notebook with an annual subscription. So this really summarizes and really helps for those of you who are looking at ELNs understand Accelrys' portfolio. Next generation ELNs, speciation. There is a right balance for the right scientist out there. And for that reason, I really see that there's three main areas, main evolutions of the ELNs. Those people want that keep it simple, paperless lab. Those who want to drive process efficiency. And those who want highly compliant QC, QA labs here. And this is why Accelrys has these three ELNs. We have the iLabber ELN available in the cloud. With 30 minutes training, you can actually be running. With 60 seconds, you can actually be up and installed and access to your subscription. The Symix Notebook, doing that integration, doing the knowledge management, doing the workflow. We're delivering this in both regulated and non-regulated environments across research and development. And then newly, beginning this year, we just acquired the VelQuest Smart Lab QA/QC, the leading QA/QC in life science ELN. These guys, because of their focus, because of focusing on the right balance, have shown 25% cost reduction in QA/QC, 50% reductions in cycle times, and tenfold reduction in compliance risk. This is because it's focusing on the right balance. This is where I see the three areas of evolution. So if you want to learn more, I highly encourage you to go to our website. I hope you found the information valuable, and I look forward to hearing our next speaker from Waters.
Thank you, Dominic. Some really good advice, and for those of you out there who have questions or concerns, feel free to type it into the question box that appears on your screen and send it to us. We will be discussing all your questions right after our final speaker gives his talk today. And our final speaker is Dr. Thomas Schmidt, who is a Senior Product Manager at Waters. He started his career at Creon Lab Control as a software developer. And in 2002, he moved to marketing and took over as a product manager for e-record management and laboratory workflow management systems when Creon Lab Control was acquired by Waters. So his current focus is on SDMS Vision Publisher, the ELN for analytical labs. And I know he has some useful advice to share with us about use and implementation of ELNs. So welcome, Thomas.
Thank you, Tanuja, for your introduction, and hello to everyone. In my presentation, I will talk a little bit about the scope of the new generation ELNs and what you could and should expect of such a system. First, I would like to provide some background information about Waters. Waters has a more than 50 years lasting history in the laboratory business. We are the leading solution provider for LC, MS, and UPLC technology, as well as for laboratory informatics. The informatics portfolio includes applications such as Empower, the market-leading chromatography data system, MassLynx for mass spectrometry applications, and the Waters New Genesis SDMS platform for data management and workflow management. And our ELN offering, the SDMS Vision Publisher, actually represents the workflow component of this platform. Before I will talk about the ELN in more detail, I would like to set the scene a little bit. Today we see many interesting challenges in the science-based industry. Look, for example, at the life science industry, and you will see that a lot of blockbusters are going out of patent in the near future, that companies are changing their research effort towards the development of new blockbusters, and they are based on, for example, biopharmaceutical research. At the same time, the market for generic drugs has never been bigger. Countries are changing their strategy in annual medicine spending dramatically towards a more generic drug approach, and emerging countries are a huge market, regardless whether you are working in a biopharmaceutical company or a food and beverage manufacturer or a chemical company. You are operating in a tougher, more competitive global market. You are under intense pressure to accelerate the pace of development and get new products out of the door. And new regulatory requirements don't make things easier. So, for example, just think about the new Food Safety Modernization Act, which was signed in the United States back in January 2011. This law actually is regarded as a true game changer in the food industry. It gives the FDA and its auditors the right to arrive unannounced at laboratories, and the auditors could ask for any category of data they choose. And the lab must be able to deliver that data, the results, and the proof of their compliance right on the spot. So I think in summary, we are all subjected to the credo to deliver better results at lower costs in the shortest time frame. But regardless in which industry you are working, the analytical labs share quite common problems. Whereas the analysis methods may vary in detail, the overall daily routine in the labs is quite the same. So you have incoming samples that you have to test, you have to manage your instruments and your consumables, you have to perform the tests, collect the results, and to report them back to the originator. Or in other words, you need sample management, inventory management, workflow management, and data management. What about the use of an ELN in the different domains within the same company? So when you look at the development process, which is more focused on the solution of problems. You need the flexibility to add in ad hoc information, for example, like chromatograms. You have a quite volatile workflow, which also needs to be flexible. You have to make ad hoc decisions. You have a higher level of personal interactions and discussions, but you are driven by the time to market. The quality control, on the other hand, is very often the bottleneck in the overall manufacturing process. But the quality control includes a lot of repetition of similar steps, and this is an obvious area for streamlining and improving the processes by standardization. And the reduction of manual steps and automation through integration, this seems to be a straightforward approach to improve the lab efficiency. So at the first glance, you may have a strong contradiction between the free-flow development process and the routine testing in the quality department. But, I mean, of course, you can see the link between these two domains, because the SOP, as a result of the development process, will later live and be used in the quality department. So, therefore, from the business perspective, but also from the IT perspective, an ELN that serves both purposes with an appropriate depth is the optimal solution. And additionally, late development is anyway quite close to the work which is typically done in QC, also concerning the regulations. After talking about the industries and the labs, let's now have a look at the users, the analysts and the lab managers who actually have to fulfill all these guidelines and requirements we talked about before. The laboratory operation is very complex, and as a lab person you have to deal with a variety of tasks and issues. Some are science related and some can probably be attributed to operational shortcomings. Things like manual transcriptions due to the number of different IT systems are only one aspect. We saw examples that sometimes you have to enter the sample ID 5 or 6 times in the course of one analysis method. But the more complex and higher the number of systems is, the higher is the chance of an error, of course. And here is where the electronic laboratory notebook comes into the game. In the past years, ELNs have transitioned from pure documentation tools to comprehensive laboratory platforms. We already heard this today. And on the one hand, this is of course attributed to the new functionalities ELNs are offering, such as inventory management and sample management. But on the other hand, you also have their increased abilities to integrate with other existing systems. For example, business applications as LIMS, SAP, or other systems like instrument software. And therefore, the ELN can really nowadays act as a portal for the entire lab operation. And this means that you can now move from a scattered, delocalized analysis process into a single, transparent online workflow. You can track your analysis process, the samples, and the results at all times. But talking about the evolution of ELNs, it is not only about new features. Even more important is the user experience. This is so important because an ELN in the analytical lab is in the first place supposed to be a tool for the user at the bench. And this shall be, of course, reflected in a user-centric design of the software. So especially when you have to migrate from a paper-based workflow to an electronic workflow, you must make sure that the transition is as smooth as possible for the user so that they can achieve their tasks in a convenient way. The user must not be overwhelmed with features, but must be able to find easily the information they are interested in, regardless of your role, if you are an analyst at the bench or a lab manager. When you look at the turnaround time of your samples, you probably will notice that the bottleneck is the actual review process. And the reason is that you have to go to the entire documentation in order to verify that everything has been done in the correct way. That the instruments were fit for use, that the used reagents and consumables were not expired. And the advantage of having all the information of the used equipment and materials in one platform, in the same platform that you use for running your electronic procedures, is actually the complete traceability you get. So the system can then automatically go through all the test documents and the test context and check if the requirements were met. The reviewer gets then a summary overview, and only if a problem occurs, you are directed to the origin of the problem. And as you can imagine, this review by exception reduces the review time remarkably. When you want to implement an ELN, you're probably not starting from an empty ground. The IT projects we see today are no longer just ELN projects. When you look at the requirement documents, you see also requirements dealing with sample management, inventory management, and of course data management. And the point of discussion is, of course, if you should look for a best-of-breed solution. That means that you have specialized solutions from different vendors, let's say for ELN, perhaps for LIMS, for sample management, and an SDMS for the data management. Or if you should always look for a single platform solution. And of course the answer is it depends. Let me give you an example. If you have already a LIMS in place, but you want to switch from paper-based to electronic test execution, you should not replace the LIMS, even if the new platform has sample management capabilities. On the other hand, if you have a project in which you want to connect a business system as SAP to your lab, and you need a solution for sample management as well, then you should definitely consider to take advantage of the sample management capabilities of your new ELN platform instead of implementing an additional LIMS system. So when you have a single platform to implement, the implementation will be much easier. But anyway, whatever your decision is, your new system must be highly integrable into the existing IT and lab environment. So if you really decide to implement an ELN system in your laboratory, what would be a good approach to do that? If you decide to implement an ELN in a QC area, the first thing you should think about are your data. What is your current data strategy? Do you have to burn a DVD at the end of the day as your archiving strategy? So where are your relevant data located? Are you more focused on file data or on print data? So first, tidy up your data. Then what we hear very often, especially in bigger companies, is we want to implement such a system and we have thousands of methods. Can we all then transition to an electronic procedure? The answer is you could do this, but you definitely should not do this because it will take you years. So one advice could be first focus on certain strategic products. So start with 1 or 2 products, implement between 10 and 30 methods, then you would have a high throughput and you would have a big win for the beginning. And of course when you implement the ELN and you have a data management strategy, make sure that you have integrated the data management with your ELN. This of course avoids manual transcriptions, for example by retrieving automatically the information out of your data into the ELN document, and of course it guarantees you entire traceability. When you would do an implementation in the R&D area, of course the data management paradigm applies as well. But what you also should take into account is that you should agree on a common terminology, because in different labs, in different domains, you have different terms for the same thing, and when you want to really to take advantage of the collaboration, you should agree on such a terminology in order when you do a search that you can be sure that you actually don't miss important things which could then cause redundant work. When you work in late development and you want to implement an electronic test execution system, you should ensure that your electronic methods are parameterizable and not just including the parameters as fixed value. The reason is that during method development you might change your parameters, and otherwise you would have an administrative burden to keep with your parameter changes. So when we are talking nowadays about a state-of-the-art ELN, we are not talking any longer about a pure electronic documentation tool. We are more talking about a comprehensive laboratory platform which can be a single point solution with integration capabilities. And by doing this, you actually can standardize your entire information management, for example, by an integrated common database. When you make a decision about what ELN or platform to implement, don't make a decision for a system just because it has the most features. Most of them you won't use anyway. Look at your requirements and choose the system that best suits with your requirements. But you should not make your decision purely based on the price, because just imagine the following. You are working in a regulated lab, and the FDA or any other regulatory agency audits your lab. When the auditor asks you, why did you choose this system you're using, then your answer should not be because it was the cheapest one. But your answer should be, we have chosen it because this system is the one with the best fit with our requirements. With this said, I would like to thank you for your attendance in this webinar and your interest in this topic. And if you have specific questions to our solution and our approach, please don't hesitate and contact me directly. And Tanuja?
Thank you, Thomas. A very nice talk. And I just wanted to remind the audience that the webinar will be archived. However, you will not be able to download slides from the webinar link. So if you need a copy of the presentations, please contact our speakers directly, and their contact information is now on your screen. So with that, let's get to addressing some of the questions that have come in. So the first point is, and there are a couple of questions on this topic, so I want to bring it up. People are still a little bit confused about ELN and LIMS, and can all of you explain what the difference is, and if people have already invested in a LIMS system, do they still need to invest in an ELN? And if they have separate ELNs and LIMS, how do they interface or integrate well together? So I would like to throw that question out there, and does anyone want to take the first stab at answering it?
Dominic from Accelrys here. I'll be happy to take that.
Okay.
So yeah, no, excellent question. I think there is a lot of confusion in the market with ELN and LIMS. I think one of the key aspects is LIMS are adding more, well, let's look at a very high level. Data can be split into unstructured and structured data. And what we mean by that is unstructured. This is the sort of ad hoc sort of documentation. And then the structured, obviously, files, information that's being consistently produced. Really, the LIMS is very good at that structured data management, or traditionally. ELNs very much thought of a document. And we're starting to see a confusion because ELNs are starting to manage structured information, and then ELNs are starting to add unstructured information capture capabilities. So there's a little confusion sort of driven by that. But fundamentally, if you think about LIMS being very good at managing and processing that structured information, and ELN as the unstructured, that is really one way to look at it. And then think about they're starting to get this overlap. If you actually look at the market data out there, I think it estimates that, 56% of all LIMS users are interested or deploying an ELN at this point. So there's very, very natural synergy. And the workflows that we see, and we actually have adapters that we use to integrate with common LIMS systems out there. The whole aspect is I set up my study or my experiment and the context of my experiment, my design goals, etc., the methodology, the protocols. I set that up in the ELN. I then will send that request or information over to the LIMS environment, and I'll consume information that's being captured directly, the summary information, I don't capture typically all the raw data. It doesn't make sense into context to just capturing the very high-value contextual information. So that's typically, how we see it being used. Being able to provide the context around what the information in the LIMS and return the summary information out of the LIMS environments.
Okay.
Okay, this is Francois here. Maybe I could add something to what you just said, Dominic. I think the structured and unstructured information is a key aspect. Another way to look at the difference is also to say that LIMS really manipulates samples, so it's really sample-centric, and ELN manipulate experiments. Of course, within an experiment, you will use sample information. That's why the interaction between ELN and LIMS are inevitable, and that may sometimes blur the lines. But the true meaning and aim for these systems is one to document experiments, and the other one to document samples. Depending on to which extent you need advanced information on LIMS or experiments, that should guide you on which tool to use. Of course, most of ELN systems will provide some light sample information or LIMS light functionality, type of functionality. We also see LIMS vendors adding ELN type of functionality. It's just telling you that these are two key tools in the lab that are targeted at different goals, but the choice is not easy. You have to carefully look at what you have today. I mean, if you have already one of the systems and you need more advanced features on the other side, it will probably push you to buy a second system. But if you have nothing, you may also consider one system that provides maybe something out of the box that fits for your needs. It's really based on your needs and check what the provider can give you.
And looking at the context of this this presentation today about next generation, and you look at the role of LIMS, let's take the QA/QC. There's three core software environments that are critical in that space. It's typically have an enterprise resource planning tool, an ERP tool. You'll have LIMS, and then you'll have an ELN. Now, what we're seeing as it evolves is this concept of thin LIMS, where LIMS is playing less and less of a role, and ERP and ELN are playing more roles. And there's predictions there that eventually the consumption of capabilities from the ERP systems and the ELN systems will literally longer term replace the whole aspect of what a LIMS is. Likewise, if you look more downstream in sort of development, where really it's the PLM, the product lifecycle management tools, that are key here, and then you have integration with LIMS and ELN. We're seeing a similar, more delayed than QA/QC strategy here, where we see LIMS being squashed in this space as functionality from the PLM systems and the ELN systems are consuming LIMS capabilities.
I would like to add something.
Sure.
So, how to distinguish between a LIMS and an ELN? The LIMS is regarded as a business application. The ELN is regarded as a laboratory application for the person at the bench. And so, of course, a lot of laboratories have LIMS system deployed, or even they are more deployed perhaps in the manufacturing department. And when we talk to people at the bench who are using an ELN, they still need to know where their sample is, what their pending work is. And so the question is perhaps not about the tools if you need another LIMS system. The question is more about functionality. So what do you use for your lab to be successful? And if it comes out that you need to track, or you want to track and document your sample management, then the question is, okay, should it be in another LIMS system, or could it be an inherent part of CLN? Because the samples and the tests are correlated very closely together.
Okay, got it. So then a follow-up to that is, if you have a LIMS from one vendor and a ELN system from the other, do they talk well with each other? Is it easy to migrate data from one system to the other?
I can take that, Dominic, here, and I'm sure others will contribute. I think it depends on the ELN and how popular depends on the LIMS and obviously the ELM. Typically in our environment, for instance, we've actually created connections for the more common LIMS systems. In fact, there's about 120 LIMS providers out there. There are, a few major ones that are, market leaders, and naturally we have connections to integrate with those. So if you own one of those market-leading LIMS, then it's fairly easy to integrate because we have these little connectors that allow you to move and transfer information across. Failing that, if you don't have a connector and you're not willing to do some extension, some consulting or some extra coding, then there's always that good old approach of electronic cut and paste. That is still a lot more efficient than, for instance, printing the document out, cutting it and sticking it into your notebook with sticky tape and glue.
Okay, sounds good. Thomas or Francois, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, just to say that I think also that this is also here. There are, as Dominic said, there are too many systems to provide one-to-one integration. So it's all about looking at what APIs, so application programming interface, are provided by the different vendors, and then you will have also a good feel about how easy or complex it is to connect the two systems. So that's really a key question, and see how you can connect them.
Okay.
This is Thomas from Waters. Yeah, so I think most ELNs have a quite open architecture, which allows you to quite easily with regard to interfacing is a strange term, but which allows you to connect to external systems. The question is just to which degree you can map the data structure from the LIMS into the ELN. So if you can mimic the sample approach, or if you just focus on the test level.
Got it. Okay, so moving on to the next topic, could you provide insight into compatibility with other systems such as Oracle, SAP, or other ERP systems for track and trace and regulatory oversight?
So when you're talking, this is Thomas from Waters. So when you talk about compatibility, so this is, and you're talking about SAP systems, so this is a little bit comparable to the interface to a LIMS, so regarded as general business systems. And so the same rules apply in general as a connection to a LIMS, I would say.
Okay, so they are compatible.
Of course, you must provide an interface to these systems because there are some specialties, especially when you look at SAP. But once you have an interface in place, you could also get a connection between these ERP systems.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Thomas. Anyone else have anything to add to that question?
Yeah, I'll just add where we see in the common integrations, one of the things that the common object that gets managed in those systems is the standard operating procedure. It's a very nice to, in a very agile way, develop, for instance, an ELN and a standard operating procedure for a methodology, a recipe, and then publish that up to either a PLM or an ERP system where you're trying to do planning and saying everyone's to use this particular SOP. So then you can send out a request, for instance, from that ERP to an ELN to say we need to modify this, etc. Those are the sort of stuff. But again, a lot of times when we find people wanting to do integration, it's down to specific business issues that they've got. And I think Thomas alluded to this in the fact that the ELNs have deliberately been built to be quite extensible and flexible. So if there are specific business needs, they can be tuned, they can be configured, they can be extended to address very specific needs, very specific integrations.
Great. Okay, thank you. There's a question about value realization in the sense that how do we actually measure, I guess, the ROI on investing in such systems? Are there, how much is it that you actually save, and are there any tools that are out there that would help you measure this?
This is Thomas from Waters.
Okay.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Thank you. So actually, what we hear very often that customers have already certain projects and go ongoing like a Lean Six Sigma projects. And where they start is actually counting the clicks you have to do, especially when you work with different applications. So for example, you have a CDS system where you have to log in, you have a LIMS system where you have to log in, and so forth. So they really want to reduce the time you have to spend on a certain task. And I think time saving is, of course, the biggest return on investment you get. And during my presentation, I already elaborated on the time it costs to review a certain procedure. And I think here you can really gain the biggest time saving in the whole process, because the measurement itself with the highly sophisticated instrument takes only seconds or minutes in the worst case. But documenting the sample preparation and reviewing all the stuff, this is a real bottleneck where you have the biggest time savings.
Very interesting.
And Dominic, I'll add here. ROIs is it's easy to measure ROI in different areas, and I do have some advice here. If you're in early sort of ad hoc processes, it's very difficult to find a consistent process that you can measure an ROI. When you've got, as Thomas said, a standard review process, and you can say, okay, we went from 30 days to 2 days in getting this through 15 different. That's easy to measure. So what we see is certainly in the QA/QC environment, very easy to measure metrics. A lot of very defined processes that you can look at the delta. My advice to people who are going into, I've seen several customers use a very basic approach, very simple approach, and it is well documented that there is a 20% productivity improvement in just the documentation efficiency. So I've seen customers just simply look at a few scientists and look at, on average, how much time do they spend reporting, collating, aggregating, writing up information in their paper notebook. There's one company, I won't mention the name, the number comes to mind is they average 12 hours around information that was either paper-based or electronic trying to bring this together. And they estimate, you just apply a 20% time saving, it's about 2.4 hours or something, and then they worked out the FTE cost, their fully loaded FTE cost. And then they turned around and said, well, this is saving us X amount of dollars a year and allowing, more importantly, our scientists to focus on productivity, doing more experiments versus documenting or finding the information around an experiment. So bottom line here is, my recommendation is do some simple time studies. How much time is spent? Apply a 20% metrics of improvement on that, around that documentation, and then work it out. And I think you'll generally find with most DLN vendors, if you do that, your payback will be within the first year.
Absolutely. This is Francois here. Just to add a compliment of his. I agree with what you said, Dominic. That's really well agreed. That 20% figure. Maybe to 2 points. The workflow which are put in place typically for requesting an analysis and at any time being able to know where your sample is, what's the status of the analysis. It's an area where companies save a lot of time because they instantly know what's the status and where the sample is. I heard that it could, the process could take, from weeks to now a few hours. So that there were areas where you can save a lot of time. Another one, Dominic, you mentioned that for R&D, it's maybe not always easy to find the right criteria or measurement to estimate the savings. Another area where you can save a lot is, if you have any dispute in court regarding, what you've done or what you've discovered, imagine that if you have the proper information secured and protected in your ELN, you will save a lot of time finding it back, and maybe also saving a lot of money on the lawyer's costs or what it could be in the end. So that's also an area to look at.
Yep. All right.
So this is Thomas from Waters. I have to add something. I think most vendors can help with ROI calculations because they have these calculation tools, and they can help the customer to consider the relevant aspects because we have the experience based on many implementations.
Right. Absolutely. Well, the next question is, well, actually, it's just an interesting perspective. As a research integrity officer, ELN, scare me. One talked about research integrity issues in ELN. Can one or more of the speakers reassure me about ELNs facilitating the detection and prevention of fraud or fabrication of data? So can each of you just briefly comment on what you have in place to help that?
Yeah, I can start if you want. This is Francois from Agilent. That's a typical question where people fear about the electronic system not having that under control. But I can really reassure you that having the electronic record properly signed and there was standard which exists that you can extract the electronic record with its signature. You can put it in another system, and thanks to the standard, you will be able to verify that the record itself is not compromised, and you will be able to store these records at different locations for security. So that's really the best protection you can get, and over a long term, because you can reapply signature with time. Maybe in 15 years from now, the standard will be different, or the capacity to break the existing signature will be there. So you will have the ability to sign again and to augment the protection of your data. So that's really a no-brainer for us.
Yeah, and I'll add a few things to this. I mean, today there's estimated about 154,000 ELN users of various form. Really it's speaking to the fact that the market is really moving in this direction, and that barrier of concern has been overcome. There's a lot of investigation already gone. To try and sort of ease your mind, this data, our ELNs, and I think I'm speaking for all the vendors here, is held in some of the most robust, highly secure databases in the world, where everything from clinical data is already in, your bank details are already in, CIA data sits in this stuff. So we're using some of the most secure technologies to protect your investments. The other thing is just in terms of mentality and mindset about securing your data. The fact it's now electronic, there are electronic records, workflows of who accessed what, who documented what. To me, if I was a researcher with any bad intent, I'm being watched. Everything's being traced. You can actually go back and find out when something was first documented. You can find out if someone's viewed that information. It actually provides more of a policing and a fear that I shouldn't do anything around this because there's more control on the information now and more insight as who's playing with it, who's using it.
I see. Okay.
This is Thomas from Waters. I would even say that fraud in the electronic system is harder to achieve than in a paper system, because what we do is, first, we audit trail everything. Second is you can apply electronic and even digital signature. And what is important here is that this signature is directly correlated with the content of the document or the record. And every time you would look at such a record, an automatic integrity check takes place, so that each fraud will be detected relatively easy.
Is there a concept of like identity theft with ELNs? I mean, can you log in as somebody else and change things around? Is that possible?
The only way that would be possible is if you shared your password. I mean, that's just standard. You wouldn't share your bank password with anyone else, and that's the policy that you obviously have to enforce in an organization. But let's step back and think about the alternative. Paper notebook, there's none of that security. Things are protected now behind a password access to your electronic records. You don't have that with paper.
Absolutely. All right. Moving on to the next question. So can ELNs satisfy regulatory requirements like the 21 CFR Part 11? And can they do that well?
Oh, yes, absolutely. This is Francois. I think the 21 CFR Part 11 is one of the first regulations that was really taken care of at the beginning of the move to electronic records. So that's the one which is probably the most carefully looked at.
Yeah, I don't think any ELN vendor would be in business if they weren't able to deliver a system that could be 21 CFR 11 certified.
All right. And here's another question about how auditors react to ELNs. Can you share your experiences? Do you think they still prefer a paper trail and actually the bound notebooks and so on, or do you think they are actually in a mindset where they prefer ELNs?
So this is Thomas from Waters.
Okay. Go on, Thomas.
Thank you. So actually the mindset changes a little bit because when you look at the history of, for example, the 21 Part 11 regulation, it started out as an electronic way to store and release data. Then there was taken a step back to allow paper and to give companies more time to go this step. And now the FTA starts actually more auditing the transition to the electronic world. So the acceptance is much higher. Of course, you have to prove that you work in a compliant way. And I think the good thing is because you are moving to an electronic environment, you also can get easier compliance. So compliance and efficiency is no longer a contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. This is being encouraged. I mean, it makes their job easier. Having to sort of go through paper trails, manually do this versus electronic to being able to search, trace back. As long as you've delivered it in a compliant environment, it makes their job much easier to see if you're breaking or breaching any standards.
Correct. Okay.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Francois. Did you have anything to add?
No, I fully agree. I mean, one of the signs is that the FDA will encourage you to submit electronically. So it's really a move that we see in every party will force that in the future.
All right.
Yeah, and when you start looking at sometimes you have a quality issue and you've got 2 weeks to respond to it. Having to go through a paper trail in a development or a QC QA environment is absolutely horrendous.
Mm-hmm.
But electronically, if you can quickly search, do those genealogy, where did this sample, where did this method be used, etc. It makes it really easy to report back quickly and efficiently to these guys with consistent presented information.
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely. And so here's our last comment. We're joined by somebody from University of Nigeria, and she says that she has heard a lot about ELNs but has never had the opportunity to use one, and there's nobody at her institution who knows about ELNs or how to use it. So she's just hoping that ELNs are easy to use and it's not too complicated. So I just wanted you to acknowledge her comments, and also to reassure her that, as you have been claiming, ELNs are definitely easy to use, and probably won't involve too much training. And even if it does, I'm assuming most companies have people who can provide training to, even University of Nigeria and other places.
That's a very common observation, and I just throw back the challenge. I said you can get started in 60 seconds. There's a website out there, ilabber.com. You can literally have a free subscription started for 2 weeks, and you will just see how easy. There's no installation. It's you just log on and you can start entering. Put project groups, all sorts in there. Try it. It's incredibly easy to get started. It's an incredibly easy transition from paper. So that's a free experiment for you. Just go out there, try it. ilabber.com. It's ILABBER.com.
Good advice. Francois, Thomas, anything to share?
Yeah, this is Francois here. I think if you remember well, in each presentation, the words ease of use, were cited. So it's really a key aspect if we want to be able to deploy to large groups and to force the acceptance of ELN within organizations. So, and I think we are judged by users. We don't have to tell our system is easier to use than the other one. You can also get feedback from existing customers and share with them and get their feedback on how the learning has been, and how with long-term, how easy it is to transition from one version to another, for example. So that's typically something you can try the system, but you can also get existing users' feedback, and we can give contacts if needed.
Okay.
This is Thomas from Waters. I agree completely with my colleagues. So nowadays it's not about features, it's about user experience, and a new feature wouldn't be appreciated if the user experience would not be appropriate.
All right. Absolutely. All right. Thanks a lot. I think we have covered all the questions that have been sent over. If any of you have additional questions or would like to reach out to our panelists for their guidance or for a copy of their slides, you have their contact information on your screen. So I would like, at this time, I would like to thank all our sponsors, Agilent Technologies, Accelrys, and Waters for their support of this webinar. Thank you so much, Thomas, Dominic, Francois. I think all of you really put together very informative talks, and thanks so much for participating in the Q&A and giving your candid feedback. And finally, thank you all for taking the time to join us today. I hope you found the webinar useful. Do plan to visit Lab Manager's website, www.labmanager.com, to view all our archived webinars, and you can also get information about our upcoming webinars on the site. So do join us for our next webinar, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. It will be on the uses of mass spectrometry for drug discovery. So until then, goodbye and good luck. Thank you.